Chapter 17 from Thunder Cave. We left early the next morning and walked for several miles. The Grumman escarpment was east of us, across the riverbed. I looked at the huge hills in the distance, searching as far as I could see. It wasn't going to be easy to find my father. As we walked, I thought about Tall's dream. I saw you walking in a big land. You were not alone, but I could not see who you were with. I guess his dream had come true. I was walking in a big land, and I was not alone. There were times that I had to almost jog to keep up with Sepit. I suspected that if he was alone, he would be moving at an even brisker pace. He pointed to a column of smoke rising in the distance. "Poachers," he said. I looked. The smoke came from the other side of a small hill. "How do you know?" I asked. I have seen their signals all day. Their signs all day," he said. "They've killed something, and it is being cooked." "I don't understand." "I will show you," he said. "But we must be careful. They are very dangerous men." We walked towards the hill and climbed up the steep bank. When we got into the top, we crawled the last 30 feet and peeked over the edge. Below, leaning against an old truck, were 4 men carrying rifles. The truck was parked near the carcasses of 2 elephants. My father's letters had not prepared me for the horror of what I saw. The poachers watched as a group of people butchered the elephants. I heard a steady thunk, 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 as the axes chopped the ivory tusks. The women took heavy strips of elephant meat and placed them on the fire. Standing next to one of the elephants was a young calf. It nudged its dead mother with its trunk, trying to get her to move. Every once in a while it let out a sorrowful bellow. The people gathering the meat paid little attention to the calf, but the poachers thought it was funny and pointed and laughed at it. I was enraged. I wanted to kill them. As if he could read my mind, Sepit put his hand on my shoulder. He shook his head sadly and whispered, "There's nothing you can do." "What about the calf?" I asked angrily. Sepit shook his head. I looked on helplessly as one of the poachers walked up behind the calf, turned, and charged. The poacher slipped and fell, but before the calf could reach him, several shots rang out. The impact of the bullet sent the calf cartwheeling, then it crumbled to the ground. I felt myself rising up, but Sepit tightened his grip on my shoulder and pulled me back down. "No," he said. The poachers were laughing. I was stunned. "We must go now," Sepit whispered. "We have seen enough." I hesitated. Sepit whispered more empathetically, "We must go." I didn't want to. I wanted to do something. No wonder my father decided to stay behind. Sepit dragged me away from the edge, and for the first time I was angry with him. "No," I said, "let me go." I tried to jerk away, but he held on. How could he watch this senseless slaughter and not want to do something about it? I rolled away from him and stood up. He tackled me and pinned me to the ground. I couldn't move. His face was right next to mine. "Listen," he said. "You must get a hold of yourself, Jacob. There is nothing we can do about this. We have another goal." "My goal is to find my father. Maybe to help him with his work. Those elephants are why he's out here." "I don't know about your goal." "Our goals are the same. Your goal is to make it rain. My goal is, if it rains, the slaughter may stop. A little rain changes everything. That's the remarkable thing about East Africa. A few days of rain can turn this hard, grim land into a soft green landscape." I understood what Sepit was saying, but I doubted my earlier belief that he could do it. "Nobody can make it rain," I said bitterly. Sepit sat up slowly, but still held my arm firmly. He looked at the cloudless African sky and said sadly, "You may be right, Jacob, but somebody has to try." I followed his upward gaze, feeling guilty for what I'd said. I thought about the poacher's cruelty. Those bastards. Now is not the time, he said, letting my arm go. I sat for a few moments, breathing deeply, feeling the fight drain from me. But the memory of what I had seen would never leave me. Sapit was right. Now wasn't the time. I looked at him and knew that he had saved my life again. We stood, brushed ourselves off, and walked down the other side of the hill. We walked for several hours in silence. I couldn't stop thinking about what the poachers had done. Elephants were murdered for their tusks. The tusks were smuggled out of the country and shipped all over Asia, where the ivory was carved by people as poor as the poachers who had killed the elephants. My father had written to me many times about the illegal ivory trade. The export ban on ivory has driven up the prices of the white gold. The more difficult something is to obtain, the more expensive it becomes. But what else can they do? Africa is a big place and every elephant can't be guarded. So they make it legal to export ivory. And other countries make it illegal to import it. And this brings in a different caliber of poachers with sophisticated weapons, communication, transportation, and money. The greater the risk, the greater the profit. I suppose the slaughter won't end until the last bullet is shot through the heart of the last elephant. And for what, I thought? So wealthy people can have ivory necklaces and bracelets to wear? Or ivory knickknacks to display on their mantles and shelves? What was the point of this? Sapit broke the silence. Satanik is near. What? Satanik is near, Sapit repeated. How do you know? I asked. Sapit looked at me and smiled. I feel him, don't you? No, I said. The only thing I felt was sorrow for the poor elephant calf and its mother, now in the bellies of those people. An outrage over the fact that I hadn't been able to do anything about it. You're still angry, Sapit said. I looked at him. Not at you, I said. You did me a favor. I didn't even know what I was thinking. There was nothing the matter with your thinking. Your action could have been a problem, though. My mother said that I inherited my father's temper. As we get older, we become our fathers and mothers. The best we can hope for is to live our lives as well or better than they have. I thought about this. He was right. Our parents were inside of this. I carried mine everywhere I went. My mother had died, but her life continued with me. We walked on for a while longer. Then Sapit stopped and looked straight ahead. What is it? I didn't see anything unusual. Suddenly, not 20 feet away, a very old man stepped out from behind a thick clump of bushes. His abrupt appearance startled me. He leaned on a long staff and stared at us. Satanik? I asked. Sapit nodded. Satanik was very old and frail. Loose skin hung on his bony frame, giving him a shriveled appearance. He wore a bright red shuka and a very old necklace made out of large blue beads, lion's teeth, and feathers. He smiled and motioned for us to step forward. Sapit and he exchanged greetings in Maasai. Then Sapit bent forward, and the old man spit on his hand and placed it on Sapit's head. You must do the same, Sapit said to me. I hesitated. Go on, Sapit insisted. It's customary. I bent forward and felt Satanik's hand touch my head. When I stood up, they exchanged more words, and Satanik turned and started to walk away. He has invited us to his corral, Sapit said. We followed him. Should we be out here alone? Should he be out here alone? There are others back at the corral. Nobody tells Satanik what he should be doing, Sapit laughed. How old is he? I don't know. Some say that he is the oldest man in Africa. When I was a boy, he looked just as he does now, and my father said that Satanik looked the same when he was a boy. Come on, Sapit, I protested. Nobody lives that long. Sapit smiled and continued to walk. I figured the corral was close by now. I was wrong. Mile after mile we followed Satonic through the bush. He moved at a slow, steady pace without resting or taking a sip of water. The walk to his corral was far from easy. He led us over the top of small hills and through very dense brush. Was he waiting for us? I asked. Sapit nodded. How did he know we'd be there? Satonic is the Laban. It's his job to know these things. There are other Labans? Yes, Sapit said, but only one Satonic. We followed Satonic for the rest of the day. At sunset, we climbed to the top of the hill. On the other side was a typical circular Maasai corral surrounded by a thorn fence. A fire burned in the middle of the corral, sending up a thin column of smoke into the dust. A few cattle and goats were secured behind a wooden fence in one part of the corral. We followed Satonic down the hill and through the opening of the corral. As soon as we got inside, 2 young boys ran over and pulled a thorn barricade across the entrance. Aside from the 2 boys, there were 2 women in the corral about Sapit's age. They showed no concern over the fact that Satonic had been gone for most of the day. And as far as I knew, he could have been gone for several days or weeks. We walked over to the fire, and Satonic said something to one of the women. She went over to the cows, put a rope around one of them, and let it back to the fire. The other woman took a gourd and squirted milk into it from the cow's teat. A young boy ran up with a miniature bow and arrow and handed them to Satonic. The woman holding the rope tightened it around the cow's neck until its jugular vein stood out. Satonic strung the bow and arrow, took aim at the jugular, and let the arrow fly from about 3 feet away. When the arrow was removed, a stream of blood flowed and the second woman caught it in the milk gourd. When it was full, Satonic bent down and picked up a piece of dry cow dung, spit on it, then pinched it over the wound. The woman loosened the rope and the bleeding stopped. Throughout this procedure, the cow stood calmly as if nothing had happened. Satonic took the gourd and shook it gently and handed it to Sapit. Sapit said something to him, then tilted his head back and poured blood milk into his mouth. He then handed the gourd to me. The group was watching me. I didn't want to drink this stuff, but I also didn't want to embarrass Sapit. Go ahead, Sapit said. I took a deep breath and held it, put my head back, and filled my mouth with blood milk. When I swallowed it, I felt my stomach jump, but nothing came back up, thank God. The warm mixture wasn't bad. In fact, I took another drink before handing it back to the now grinning Satonic, who said something to Sapit. He says that you must be a Maasai. I smiled at Satonic. Sapit and Satonic sat by the fire and motioned for me to do the same. The women led the cow back to the corral, and the other woman brought us some dried meat to eat. Sapit and Satonic began an animated conversation that I couldn't understand. I looked up at the sky. The sun had set, and the moon appeared above the corral, 3/4 full. The 2 men talked for hours. Once in a while, I tried to figure out what they were saying, but mostly I just looked at the fire and thought about the things that had happened to me during the past several days. I was caught up in something that I didn't fully understand.